Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and a very good morning to you guys and our beloved lecturer Dr. Kausa. We are from Group 6 and I am Nurul Razmira binti Razak. So our group today will present to you about nation building, and before our group present more details about this topic, let's take a look at the outline of our presentation. Previously, Group 5 already mentioned about the era of Reconstruction during their presentation of a civil war. So the era of Reconstruction actually also part of the nation building itself. But since it's already been mentioned about during the previous presentation, so I will not explain more about it. So before I go any further, let's take a look at the definition of nation building itself. What does nation building means actually? So nation building are often used simultaneously with state building, democratization, modernization, political development, post-conflict reconstruction, and peace building. Of course, all of these has their own definition. Not all of these means nation building, but it's all interrelated towards each other. So the term of nation buildings remains imprecise and contested actually. In much of the policy of documentation, its meaning is assumed rather than defined. There is also a tendency to use the term nation building to interchangeably with what of the state building means. So many observers they would maintain that while closely related between state building and nation building are distinct process. State building is more to the task of building functioning states capable of fulfilling the essential attributes of modern statehood, while the nation building itself is referring to more abstract process of developing or community among the various groups making up the population of a particular state itself. Okay, so now let's move to our first topic, which is the westward expansion. Why they decided to go to the west and who is going to the west actually. So here is, as you can see, the event timeline on what's happening during the westward expansion. So major reason, one of the biggest reason why they go to the west is because of the westward spirit. So what is happening actually? In the middle of the 19th century, farmers in the Old West, which is located at the land across the Allegheny Mountains in Pennsylvania, these farmers they began to hear about the opportunities that they can find in the New West. So they had long believed that the land west of the Mississippi was a great desert, but it is unfit for human habitation. But now, after the federal government encouraged them to join the migratory stream westward to this unknown land, they began to migrate to the west. So, for a variety of reasons, Americans actually they felt compelled to fulfill their manifest destiny, which is which means it's a phrase actually that came to mean that they were expected to spread across the land given to them by God, and most importantly to spread predominantly American values to the frontier. Okay, so most settlers in the first wave were white Americans only. During the first wave of migration. So they sought riches in gold, cattle, or farming, or believed in their duty to spread Protestant ideas to native inhabitants, and they headed west in wagon trains along paths such as the Oregon Trail. And later on, there's also the European immigrants, particularly those who are from the Northern Europe. And later on, there's also African Americans, African American who were escaping the racism of the South. They also went to the West. In all, the newly settled area were neither a fast track to riches nor a simple expansion into into an empty land, but rather actually it's a clash of cultures, races, tradition that define the imaging of New America. So the idea was simple actually. Americans were destined and indeed divinely ordained to expand democratic institutions throughout the continent. As they spread their culture, thoughts, and custom, they will in the process improve those lives of the native inhabitants who might otherwise resist Protestant institution and, more importantly, economic development of the land. So I think of course these settlers they got assistance from the federal government because I think if they didn't get any assistance from government, this settler they will not massively migrate to the west. So what did the government do actually? The government actually, in order to transform the migration from a trickle into a steady flow, they introduced two pieces of legislation. You know, the Congress passed two significant pieces of legislation in 1862, which is the Homestead Act and the Pacific Railway Act. So this was born largely out during the President Abraham Lincoln's as he grew concerned that a potential Union defeat in the early stages of the Civil War might result in the expansion of slavery westward. So Lincoln, he hoped that such laws, these two laws, would encourage the expansion of a free soil mentality across the West. So so as you can see, the Homestead Act here is to allow any head of household or individual over the age of 21, including unmarried women, to receive a parcel of 160 acre for only a nominal filling fee, you know, in order to encourage those settlers to go to the west. And then there's also the Pacific Railway Act, in order to help those settlers to move to the west more quickly. And many railway has been built. You know, there's a new track west from Omaha, Nebraska, while the Central Pacific Railroad move east from Sacramento, California. Okay, now while the homesteading was the backbone of Western expansion, mining and cattle also play significant roles in shaping the West. The alluring, you know, the temptation of gold has long spent people on wild chases, as in the American West, the possibility of quick riches was no different. The search of gold represented an opportunity far different from the slow plot of what homesteading farmers face. So the discovery of gold at Suttles Mill in Coloma, California set a pattern for such strides that was repeated again and again for the next decade, you know, in later on what collectively became known as the California Gold Rush. So this is much rougher in character and riskier in outcomes than farming because these two opportunities brought forward a different breed of settler than the homesteaders. You know, many of the lone tree cattle riders were Mexican American or African American, and most of the men involved in both pursuits were individuals who are willing to risk what little they had in order to strike it rich. You know, in order to become rich, they do whatever they want. And in both the mining and cattle industry, however, individual opportunities slowly die out as resources, both land for grazing and easily accessed precious metals, you know, they began slowly disappear. Okay, so you can see here the cattle kingdoms. Okay, now moving on to the loss of American Indian cultures. So as American settlers pushed westward, they inevitably came into conflict with the Indian tribes that had long been living on the land. So these clashes, when they happened, are indeed brutal, quite brutal, although most of the brutality occurred at the hands of the settlers, for sure. Ultimately, the settler, with the support of local military, and later on with the federal government behind them, they managed to solve and to eliminate the tribes from the lands they desired. The result was quite devastating for the Indian tribes because they are lacking of weapons, and also there's a group cohesion to fight back against well-armed forces. So, through the years of the Indian Wars of the 1870s and early 1880s, opinion back east was mixed, but increasingly several American reformers who later on become the backbone of the progressive era had begun to criticize the violence, arguing that the Indians should be helped through Americanization. So this is where Americanization being introduced, in order to become assimilated into American society. Individual land ownership, Christian worship, and education for children became the cornerstones of this new and final assault of Indian life and culture, because all of these became assimilated to the American through the process of Americanization. So they had done many things. For example, the government permitted reformers to remove Indian children from their homes and place them in boarding school, such as the Carlisle Indian School of the Hampton Institute. This remind me of Twilight movie. Okay, never mind. At the Carlisle Indian School or the Hampton Institute, they were taught to abandon their tribal traditions and embrace the tools of American productivity, modesty, and sanctity through total immersion. So, the Indian culture, the Indian culture's life slowly being abolished through the process of Americanization, as they became to assimilate into the American society. So lastly, we can see from the westward expansion is the impact. So what is the impact of this expansion, which I focus on the Chinese immigrants and the Hispanic, because they are mainly being affected from this expansion, because in the 19th century, the Hispanic, the Chinese, and the white populations of the country collided. The white Americans, they moved further west in order to search of land and riches. They bolstered by government subsidies and unshakable belief that the land and its benefits existed for their use. I mean the white Americans. So in some ways, it was a race to the prize where white Americans, they believed that they deserved the best land and economic opportunities the country afforded, and did not consider prior claims to be valid. So neither Chinese immigrants or Hispanic Americans could withstand the assault of their rights by the tide of white settlers. Thus, a sheer numbers matched with political backing gave the whites the power they needed to overcome any resistance. Ultimately, both ethnic groups retreated into urban enclaves where their language and traditions could survive. Before I forget to mention where the Chinese immigrant came from. The initial arrival of Chinese immigrants to the United States began as a slow trickle in the 1820s, with barely 650 people living in the US by the end of 1849. However, as gold rush fever swept the country, Chinese immigrants too they were attracted to the notion of quick fortunes. So by 1852, over 25,000 Chinese immigrants had arrived, and by 1880s, over 300,000 Chinese live in the US, mostly in California. So why for the Hispanic? As we know, during the Mexican-American War in 1848, had promised U.S. citizenship to the nearly 75,000 Hispanics, and they are now living in the American Southwest. So these people, they accepted the offer and chose to stay in the United States despite their immediate relegation to second-class citizenship status. So, much like Chinese immigrants, Hispanic citizens were relegated to the worst-paying jobs under the most terrible working conditions. As the Hispanic, they work as peons, the manual laborers, which is similar to slaves. So they also as cattle herders and the cartmen transporting food and supplies on the cattle ranches that white landowner possess. So it's easy to say that, to conclude that the Chinese immigrant and the Hispanic are mostly being discriminated by the whites during the westward expansion. Okay, so now let's move to our next topic, which is industrialization and the rise of big business. So during the late 19th century, it was an energetic era of invention and entrepreneurial spirit. Building upon the mid-century industrial revolution in Great Britain, as well as answering the increasing call from Americans for efficiency and comfort, the country found itself in the grip of invention fever, with more people working on their big ideas than ever before. So, this, as you can see, the event of timeline here, many things happen. So let's move with the Alexander Graham Bell. We have our first inventors here. So the communication technologies were changing quickly, and they brought with them new ways for information to travel. One of the greatest advancements was the telephone, which Alexander Graham Bell patented in 1876. However, he was not the first to invent that concept. Bell was the first one to capitalize on it, but after securing the patent, he worked with financier and businessmen to create the National Bell Telephone Company. And then the Western Union, which had originally turned down Bell's machine, they went on to commission of Thomas Edison to invent an improved version of the telephone. So actually it is the Edison version, Thomas Albert Edison. Later on, I will explain about him. It is actually the Edison version that is most likely the modern telephone used today. Okay, so now we have Thomas Edison and his electric lighting. Yeah. So although Thomas Edison is best known for his contributions to the electrical industry, his experimentation went far beyond the light bulb actually. So Edison was quite possibly the greatest inventor of the turn of the century at that time. As he was the quintessential inventor of the era with a passion for new ideas and over 1,000 patents to his name. So, as discussed previously, new process in steel refining along with invention in the fields of communication and electricity transformed the business landscape of the America in the 19th century. So the exploitation of these new technologies provided opportunities for tremendous growth and business entrepreneurs with financial backing and the right mix of business, acumen, and ambition could make their fortunes. As you can see here, in early 19th century, the first transcontinental railroad and subsequent spur lines paved the way for rapid and explosive railway growth, and this as well as stimulated growth in the iron, wood, coal, and other related industry. The railroad industry quickly became the nation's first big business, as a powerful, inexpensive, and consistent form of transportation. Railroads accelerated the development of virtually every other industry in the country. So by 1890s, railroad lines covered nearly every corner of the United States, as you can see here, bringing raw materials to industrial factories and finished goods to consumer markets. And lastly, from what we can see during the industrialization, at this time is the building industrial America on the back of labors. So after the Civil War, as more and more people crowded into open areas and joined the ranks of wage earners, the landscape of American labor changed. For the first time, the majority of workers were employed by others in factories, and offices in the cities are increase. Factory workers in particular suffer from the inequity of their positions. Owners had no legal restrictions on exploiting employees, with long hours in dehumanizing and poorly paid work. And then later on, we have women and children were hired for the lowest possible wages, but even men's wages were barely enough upon which to live. So from 1870 through 1900, the number of women working outside the home tripled. By the end of this period, 5 million American women were wage earners, with one quarter of them working factory jobs. So most were young and under 25, and they either immigrants themselves or the daughter of the immigrants. So their foray into the working world has not seen as a step towards empowerment or equality, but rather a hardship from financial necessity. So the women's factory work tended to be in clothing or textile factories, where their appearance was less offensive to men who felt that heavy industry was their purview. Other women in the workforce work in clerical positions as bookkeepers and secretaries, or as a sales clerk. So not surprisingly that women were paid as less than men, under the pretense that they should be under the care of a man and did not require a living wage. So factory owners use the same rationale for the exceedingly low wages they pay to children. Same goes to the children's. Children were small enough to fit easily among the machines and could be hired for simple work for a fraction of an adult man's pay. So as you can see from this image, it shows that children working the night shift in a glass factory. And this, of course, growing concern among progressive reformers later on over the safety of women and children in the workplace would eventually result in the development of political lobby groups. So several states passed legislative efforts to ensure a safe workplace, and the lobby groups pressure Congress to pass protective legislation. However, such legislation will not be forthcoming until well into the 20th century. So I think that's all from me for our presentation. I pass the floor to our next presenter. Thank you.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Faradida Fitri binti Muhammad, and I'll be presenting about the growing pains of urbanization between 1870 until 1900. Can be seen here the event timeline started from 1876. The baseball fields. This was built in order to relieve the working people. The first is urbanization and its challenges. There are four things I want to explain here. So the first one is the communication improvement. When it talks about the communication, immediately we know about the telephone. Okay, this telephone was patented in 1876, and the telephone also increased in a business through more rapid and pace of demand. So there are many demand by the people during that time in order to communicate or to connect among the people. Second is electric lighting was patented by Thomas Edison. Focused to incandescent light bulb in 1879. Okay, due to the growth of factories as well as innovations such as electric lighting, which allowed them to run all the time the factories day and night, and also created a massive need for the workers. And then intracity transportation, there are two, the omnibus, and also in 1887, Frank Sprague or Sprague, I don't know how to pronounce, invented the electric trolley. So this intracity transportation I will explain in the next slide, which I will show you along with the pictures. And then the last one is the rise of skyscrapers. The first skyscraper in Chicago, which the 10-story home insurance building in 1885, which also I will provide you the picture. As I said before, this is the picture of the omnibus. Okay, this omnibus, as you can see here, they're using the horse here. A large horse-drawn carriage often placed on iron or steel tracks to provide a smoother ride. So this is iron or steel. And then after years ago, they invented to the electric trolley at public gardens, sporting in Boston. Okay, this they use the electricity. Okay, the omnibus using the horse, but this using the electricity, which are more faster, I think, more faster. And this transportation is used to connect cities to each other, especially working people, to in order to reach their destination more faster. This is the skyscraper that I mentioned before. The home insurance building in Chicago is considered as the first modern skyscraper. Okay, why they built this skyscraper? This because in the large city they had to overcome the ever increasing need for space. Okay, they need space, but in the large city they are like limited space. So they built this taller building with the elevator. Okay, the elevator can reach to the highest levels. So this modern skyscraper inspired them to build more taller buildings. Okay, next is the challenges of urbanization. There are three here. The first one, the rapid influx of workers. Second, the terrible of living conditions. Third, it was spread illness. Okay, as cities grow, the urbanization or they were unable to cope with this rapid influx of workers, and also the living condition that facing by the working class, and they cannot control these workers coming to the city, and this become the terrible living condition, especially for the working poor people. Okay, and this condition also effect to the widespread of illness such as tight living quarters with inadequate plumbing and sanitation. Okay, these challenges was attract some of the organization to relieve this condition, such as churches, civic organization, and the secular settlement house movement. And these people want to relieve to the urban working class, but then it's remained brutal for many new city dwellers. It still remains the same, even though they showed some effort. Okay, next, we can see here the settlement house movement, like I mentioned in the event timeline. The pioneering women such as Jane Addams opened Hull House in Chicago in 1889, offering services and support to the city working poor. Okay, next, the second is about the African American Great Migration and New European immigration. So this subtopic had the push and pull factors. So I divided by two, African Americans and European immigrants. The first one is African immigrants. The push factor, we can see the racial violence and limited opportunities, such as the rise of Ku Klux or Ku Klux, I don't know how to pronounce, which intense of the racial hatred. Okay, and the pull factors, we can see the seeking wage and the opportunity to vote safely as a free man. Okay, these African American did did not want to side with the landlord, and they want to free as a they want to be free. Okay, from the threat of any violences. Okay, and second is European immigrants. The push factor, we can see the Roman and persecution here. Is related to the religious or political, and as well as the racial persecution and the desire to avoid compulsory military service from their country. Okay, the pull factor, we can see here to seek new life in the United States. So there are stories about the European immigrants about the United States. The United States was the streets were paved in gold. So that's why they want to seek the new life in the United States. Okay, with these push and pull factors, however, the city residents blame recent arrivals due to the ills of the cities, and the second one, a rise in crime. Okay, when there are many immigrants came to US, and we don't know that there are the sickness or illness that they brought from their country. So when they come to the United States, they this immigrant will spread the illness among the United States people. Okay, and then the rise in crime, we can see when the urbanization, especially in transportation, and also urbanization, also the station is very crowded, and there's some people who became a pickpocket. So the crime is like quite many during that time. And then the activist group pushed for anti-immigration legislation to seek limit the wave of immigrants. For instance, the Reverend Josiah Strong, Our Country, Its Possible Future and Its Present Crisis, published in 1885. So this book is like critiques about the immigrants came to United States and state the reason why the bad effect they came to United States. Okay, as you can see here, this photo shows a newly arrived immigrant at Ellis Island in New York, which the new European immigrants. Inspectors are examining them for contagious health problems, which could require them to be sent there. Okay, it's really from chaos or urban life. Okay, personally, I love this subtopic because it's related to the entertainment and leisure time activities with the chaos and also the problems that brought from immigrants. They need to relieve from this chaos lah, from this chaos, and then they choose entertainment and leisure time activities were heavily dependent on one's status and wealth, such as working people, middle class, and wealthy people. Every single class, they had their own entertainment and leisure time activities. So the first one is working for people. They choose amusement parks and baseball games because this entertainment was inexpensive and a brief break from the secular of the tournaments. Okay, that's why they choose the amusement parks, which I will show you the amusement parks and baseball games the picture after this. And then the second in middle class as okay, this middle class include the doctors, lawyer, yeah, and related with them, escape to suburbs. Okay, this middle class escape to suburbs to keep them removed from the cities chaos outside of working hours. Okay, and the third one is wealthy people. Okay, these wealthy people was very immersed into arts and culture, as well as inclusion in the social register, allowed them to socialize exclusively with those they felt were the same social status. Okay, as you can be seen here, the Dreamland Amusement Park Tower. So this is a tower was just one of Coney Island amusement. So this is the amusement park were enjoyed by the working people. And this also the baseball field. Boston Fenway Park opened in 1912 and was a popular site for working class Bostonians to spend their leisure time. Okay, another entertainment. It's not entertainment that like the peaceful things in United States, the City Beautiful movement, and this Beautiful movement emphasized on public green spaces and more beautiful and practical city boulevards. Okay, this is the blueprint shows Burnham vision for Chicago and example of the City Beautiful movement. It is more to the green space in the United States, okay, rather than many building was good and the urbanization and the crowded and so on. So they want to emphasize the public green spaces in the United States. Okay, last but not least, change reflected in thought and writing. So when it comes to thought and writing, we can relate with the authors and thinkers that try to assess the meaning of their country's seismic shifts in culture and society through their work. And the fiction work, writers often use realism. Okay, that's one of the theory. We can say the theory of what we call his name, Charles Darwin theory evolution, which is the case that species develop and evolve through natural selection, but not through divine intervention. So this social Darwinism was accepted by many proponents of economic developments and cultural changes and also philosophers as an acceptable model to explain why some people succeeded and others failed. And also um, the philosophers look more closely at Darwin's works and sought to apply a model of proof and pragmatism to all ideas of institutions. Again, also other sociologists and philosophers also criticize the changes of the era, such as citing the inequities found in the new industrial economy and also its negative effects on workers. Okay, next I will be explaining about the politics in the Gilded Age between 1870 until 1900. So this is the event timeline that started with Mark Twain and Charles Dudley Warner published the Gilded Age in 1873. And this year was the beginning of his Gilded Age book, and that's why the Gilded Age was named by his book. This slide I want to talk about why age named as Gilded Age. Okay, this we are from Mark Twain. wrote The Gilded Age: A Tale of Today with his neighbor Charles Dudley Warner, his co-writers. And this book explained as a satire about the corrupt politics and lust for power that he felt characterized American society at that time. And this book also he explained uh, the character's desire to sell their land to the federal government and they become rich. Okay, that's why in this topic I want to explain the Gilded Age, and the name Gilded Age was come uh, from his book Mark Twain. Okay, so the first one is political correction in post-colonial America. Okay, due to this Gilded Age, this Gilded Age is related to the corruption. So I want to explain about the political correction in post-colonial America. So I divided by two: American politics, who disjointed, corrupted, and also ineffective in terms of addressing the challenges that Americans face, as well as the local and regional politics and the bosses who ran the political machine, such as Tammany Hall in New York. There's a famous political machine who dominated systematic graft and bribery, and thus the cycle of federal ineffectiveness and machine politics continued relatively unabated. Okay. Meanwhile, in the Compromise of 1877, an electoral commission declared Rutherford B. Hayes the winner of the contested presidential election with in exchange for the withdrawal of federal troops from South Carolina, Louisiana, and Florida. Okay, actually, these three states in dispute due to widespread charge of voter fraud and miscounting. As a result, Southern Democrats were able to establish control over their home government. Okay, and this campaign posters for Rutherford B. Hayes underscore the of each party, tactics of his party, which remain largely unchanged regardless of the candidates. Next, the key political issues, which was the patronage, tariff, and gold. So there are three political issues we can see here: the spoil system versus civil service reform, second high tariffs versus low, and third one is business regulation. The spoil system versus civil service reform uh, was the protection of the spoil system, that is the power of the president to practice widespread political patronage. This story about the first issues I will explain in the next slide after this with the along with the pictures. Okay, with the issues of the in the United States, they are also having a providing relief. With the first one, offered direct assistance to Americans who continued to struggle with the transformation into an industrial society. And the second one is Harrison policies. Okay, these Harrison policies offered relief to average Americans struggling with high costs and low wage, such as the first one is the Sherman Antitrust Act. The second one is the Sherman Civil Purchase Act. This relief or this effort remain largely ineffectively. This is the picture of Andrew Jackson riding a pig, which is walking over fraud, bribery, and spoils, and feeding on plunder. Patronage that I said before in the previous slide, in this case, took the form of the president naming his friends and supporters to various political posts. So, for instance, among the hardest hit was the U.S. Postal Service, which saw Andrew Jackson appoint his supporters and closest friends to over 400 positions in the survey. Okay, next about the farmers' reward in the populist era. Okay, the first one, the farmers being worried. Worried because of what? Because of the overproduction and high tariffs. And the country farmers in increasingly desperate straits. And even the federal government inability to address their concern left them disillusioned disillusion and worried. Okay, and then the next step, the farmers want to seeking solution. Why they want to seeking solution? This is because the uneven responses from the state government due to the corruption that I explained before this. So they want to seeking an alternative solution for their problems. Okay, and then they want to organize alliances, taking note of the labor movements growing in industrial cities around the countries, and farmers started to organize into alliance similar to workers' unions. And these were model of cooperation where larger number could offer more bargaining power with major players such as railroads. And last but not least, uh, this alliance actually unable to initiate widespread change for their benefit, and then they create the populist party uh, through the politics, through inside, change from the inside through politics. So they participate in the politics. So they create this party in 1891. And the farmers also hope the creation of this party would lead to president who put people or put these farmers at the first place. Okay, as you can be seen here, the flag of the Farmers Alliance displays the motto, the most good for the most people, clearly a sentiment they hope that others would believe. Okay, and then these are the People's Party gathered for its nominating convention in Nebraska, where they wrote the Omaha platform to state their preferences and goals. So this is the Populist Party. Okay, last but not least, about the social and labor unrest in the 1890s. So we took the election of 1896. The populist movement began to grow, and this populist group's movement approached the 1896 election, and the Democrats chose William Jennings Bryan for their candidates. Okay. In fact, Bryan was not a populist at all, but a Democrat whose views align with the populists on some issues. So that's why they choose William Jennings Bryan as representing the Populist Party. But then, when Bryan lost to Republican William McKinley, okay, the Bryan lost, and the Populist Party lost much of its momentum. The reformist movement remained intact. So after that, there are reformist movement that will explained by Sister Siti Fatima after this. The Republican portrayed presidential candidate Bryan as grasping politician whose populist leanings could swallow the Democratic Party. And Bryan also was nominated not only from Democratic Party but also the Populist Party, the Civil Republican Party for the 1896 presidential election. That's all from me. Thank you so much.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and hi everyone. My name is Siti Fatimah binti Azalan, and I am the last presenter for the topic United States Nation Building, and I'll be covering two subtopics, which is the progressive movement and also American policy. So here we can see the event timeline that happened starting from 1901 until 1920. So in 1901, we can see that President William McKinley was being assassinated and Theodore Roosevelt assumed his presidency. In 1906, the Resolute Inspection Act was passed, Bureau Food and Drug Act enacted, and in 1910, the International Coalition formed the NAACP, and the following year, which is 1911, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory triggered first factory inspection law. In 1912, Roosevelt formed Progressive Party. In 1913, 16th Amendment authorized federal income tax. 7th Amendment subject United States Senators to popular vote. And in 1920, the 18th Amendment prohibit manufacture and sale of alcoholic beverage. 19th Amendment guarantees a woman right to vote, to cast a vote. So next is the origin of the progressive spirit in America. So in the first decade, the progressive era was a grassroots effort that ushered in reform at state and local level. For instance, the Marketer. So the Marketer is a group of journalists and writers in collectively provided an important spark that ignite the progressive movement. Marketer also exposed problems in American society and urged the public to identify the solution. President Theodore Roosevelt knew many of these investigations were misread and considered himself a progressive. Yet, unhappy with the way they forced agendas into national politics, he was the one who first gave them the discouraging nickname Marketer. So, evoking an ill-spirited characters obsessed with things from the Pilgrim's Progress and 1678 Christian Elderly written by John Bunyan. So that's what Marketer is. So continue with the origin of progressive spirit in America. So next is at the beginning of the 20th century, however, progressive in the war captured the attention of the federal government. The challenge of the late 19th century were manifold. The first one is fast-growing cities that were ill-equipped to house the working poor. The second one is hands of politicians shackled into impotence by their system of political favors, and rural Americans struggling to keep their farms afloat. So next is the marketing journalists of the era published books and articles highlighting the social inequities of the day and exploring everyday Americans to help find solutions. Educated, middle class, Anglo-Saxon Protestant dominated the movement, but progressives were not a homogeneous group. The movement counted African American, both women and men, and urban as well as rural dwellers among its rank. So progressive costs ran from anti-recall campaign to fair pay. So they also, together with the progressives, sought to advance first the spread of democracy, improve efficiency in government and industry, and promote social justice. So the next one is progressivism at the grassroots level. So progressive campaigns stretch from the Hurricane Irene township of Texas to the slum of New York, from the factory floor to the saloon door. But what tied together these separate cause and group was the belief that the country was in dire need of reform, and the answer were to be found within the activism and expertise of predominantly middle-class Americans on behalf of tribal communities. Some efforts such as the National Child Labor Committee (NCLC) were pushed for federal legislation. However, most progressive initiatives took place at the state and local level as progressives sought to harness public support to face pressure on politicians. At the beginning of the 20th century, a more radical, revolutionary breed of progressivism began to evolve. While these radical progressives generally share the goal of their more mainstream counterparts, their strategies differed significantly. Mainstream progressive and many middle-class American fear groups such as the Socialist Party of America and the Industrial Worker of the World, which emphasize worker empowerment and direct action. So, like I said before, the example was the Social Party of America and the Industrial Worker of the World. So the next is the new voice for women and African American. This is also an important part that the progressive movement voiced out. So the progressive commitment to promoting democracy and social justice created an environment within which the movement for women's and African American rights grew and flourished. Major leaders such as Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Alice Paul, Susan B. Anthony, Carrie Chapman Catt, and others spread the cause of women's suffrage, drawing in other activists and making the case for a constitutional amendment ensuring a woman's right to vote. For the African American, they were guided by leaders such as Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois, who strove for civil rights economic opportunities, although their philosophy and strategies differed significantly. In the women and civil rights movement alike, activists both advanced their own cause and paved the way for later efforts aimed at expanding equal opportunity and citizenship. So the progressivism in the White House. Theodore Roosevelt became president only by historical accident, which is after the assassination of his previous president. So, but his activism in the executive branch spoke to the progressive spirit in the nation and transformed the president office for the 20th century. The courage is displayed in his confrontation of big business and willingness to side with workers in capital level disputes, as well as his commitment to preservation of federal lands, set an agenda his successors had to match. Like Roosevelt, William Howard Taft pushed antitrust ruling and expanded federal oversight of interstate commerce. But estrangement from his predecessor and mentor left Taft in a difficult position for a re-election. So the picture shows Theodore Roosevelt in the left side and his successor William Howard Taft in the right, will just before Taft's inauguration in 1909. So the next one is the Roosevelt also has faced some challenge. So Roosevelt third party challenge is a progressive split the Republican vote and handed Woodrow Wilson the presidency in 1912. So a progressive like his predecessor, Wilson was also a political creature who understood the need to do more in order to ensure his re-election. For example, a new freedom agenda. So what is so that is the example given. So he too sought to limit the power of big business and stabilize the economy, and he ushered in a wave of progressive legislation that grassroots progressives had long called for. The nation entanglement in World War I, however, soon stunned the progressive goals of democracy, efficiency, regulation, and social justice to back Ghana. The nation's priorities include national security and make the world safe for democracy. So moving on to the next topic, which is the age of empire, which is the American foreign policy. During this time, they have started to spread their power throughout throughout the world, not only in the Western country but also in the East country. So in this period is also known as period of Reconstruction. So the U.S. government or the United States government showed no significant initiative in foreign affairs at first. However, after a variety of factors that happened, from closing of the American frontiers to the country increased industrial production, led the United States to look beyond its border. They need to think or they need to look forward for the benefit of their nation. So, the Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Theodore Roosevelt, was one of these leaders who sought to expand America's influence globally. Theodore Roosevelt also the main gain to bring American name outside its state. So it want to introduce American nation globally. So he advocated for the expansion of the U.S. Navy, which at the turn of the century was the only weapon system suitable for securing overseas expansion. So Roosevelt has his own policy, which is big state foreign policy, which with this he established a new foreign policy approach, allegedly based on the favorite African proverb, which is speak softly and carry a big stick and you will go far. So Theodore Roosevelt was held to this or his own words to make sure that America can go globally. So he believed that in the light of the country's recent military success, it was unnecessary to use force to achieve a foreign policy goal. When conflict did arise on the other side of the Pacific, Roosevelt adopted this a policy of maintaining a balance of power among the nation there. So this was particularly event where the Russo-Japanese War erupted in 1904. The Russo-Japanese war happened between Russia and Japan, and the victory was sided to Japanese, which made the war in shock because Japanese is coming from the east, and Russia is one of the main nation that dominate the world during that time. So Russo-Japanese War initially Roosevelt support the Japanese position against Russia. However, when the Japanese fleet quickly achieved victory after victory, Roosevelt grew concerned over the growth of Japanese influence in the region and the continued threat that it represents to China and America access to those markets. In 1905, Roosevelt arranged for diplomats for both nations to attend a secret peace conference in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. When he arranged the meeting between these two nations, he used of his big stick policy and his strategy of maintaining a balance of power, which keep U.S. in United States interest in Asia is well protected. So he trying to look good, and at the same time he is securing his place in the Asia. So that's all from me, and I will as the conclusion from the topic that we has been discussed today. We conclude that the nation building in the United States required a long time and a long period to have a one solid nation building. It did not take overnight to have one country complete nation building, but it takes years, even decades, to cultivate and to shape what's suitable for the nation and whatnot. So that's all from us. Thank you. And if you guys have questions, do proceed and do be careful. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.